First of all, I want to thank you for that question. This is something that deserves to be talked about. I want to make it very clear President Biden values democracy and the right of every person, both at home in the United States and abroad, to have the right to life, to liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and all the ideals enshrined in the UN Human Charter. And we'd like to live by example, show that these policies work at home and so that they can also work abroad. However, the unfortunate reality is that we live in a world with democratic governments and we live in a world with autocratic governments. And especially because of the isolationism of the Trump years, we're interdependent on these countries that don't always share our values. They control a lot of resources that we are dependent on, especially during the Russian Ukraine war. And the president has a responsibility to uphold human rights, but also to uphold the ability of Americans at home to a livable wage and income, to stop nuclear threats around the world from the Iranian regime, and reducing world dependence on Russian gas that's further controlling the result of this Ukrainian-Russian war. And it must be understood that there is a different approach being taken from the Trump administration. Trump very much said one thing and did exactly that, and that was that human rights took a back seat always, all the time, no matter what, to economic progress. And President Biden is trying to temper that and show that we can care about speaking about human rights and making sure that there is conversation and that the truth comes out into the light, that this is very wrong for the journalist to be murdered, while also fulfilling his responsibility to Americans by making sure that, again, we have more oil production not coming from Russia furthering this war, that the Iranians have a counterweight in the region and that regional stability can be built. So he's in a position that is very difficult where he can't always act as directly as desired when it comes to these human rights things, but he can be in a position to enable you as the press to continue talking about these things by releasing the intelligence report that the President Trump administration refused to release, unclassifying the results of the investigation into how far up the chain this went in Saudi Arabia with the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And so by continuing the discourse around this, we can shift norms to be more centered on the human rights charter and American values. And I do want to talk about that principled realism of the Trump administration that um, President Biden, he speaks the language of idealists because that's who he is at his core, but he's also operating in a government and in a world of realists. And so that demands from him a mixture of both approaches. So President Biden will not disregard core American values, but he's also not going to jeopardize American livelihoods, regional stability, or imagine that simply condemning someone who's a leader of another country will force them to change their ways within one simple day. And so having American leadership at the table engaging with these other countries, as distasteful as it may be at times, will enable us to continue showing up and leading by example by what we do in our own country. And so coordination on certain topics, we're not going to go leading with the Saudi Arabians and putting them in a position to make human rights decisions in the UN, but we do have to focus on other areas where interests overlap, such as oil production, to distance ourselves from Russia's politics around that at the moment. So this will enable accountability because America cannot be separated from her press. When President Biden continues to show up, as distasteful as that may seem, that enables you to be there to raise the discourse around these human rights centered values that President Biden still continues to identify with. Thank you for your question.